Drake just crossed $10,000 in savings for the first time in his life. Nothing about his day changed. No alarm went off. No one noticed but him. He almost didn't notice either. It showed up as a normal deposit on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. Daniel crossed that same number a while ago. What actually changes at $10,000 isn't dramatic, but it's real. It's specific. And most people never stop to notice it. That's what this video is actually about, what genuinely changes, the biases that show up right after, and why this is usually the hardest money you'll ever save. Quick one before we get into this. If milestones like this are useful to break down, hit subscribe, new video every week. The standard emergency fund target is 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Based on the median U.S. household's monthly spending of about $5,100, that works out to a target of roughly $15,300 to $30,600 for a typical household. $10,000 isn't the finish line on that target. It's usually somewhere around 2 months of expenses for a median household. But it's the first point where the number stops feeling abstract and starts covering something specific, a real job loss, a real medical bill, a real car repair, without a single dollar of debt. This is genuinely the first milestone where I could handle a major unexpected expense. The exact phrase used in National Financial Well-Being research starts being true instead of aspirational. The same National Well-Being research asks a few other questions worth sitting with at this exact milestone. I am securing my financial future. I am just getting by financially. My finances control my life. $10,000 doesn't flip every one of those to a perfect answer. But it's usually the first point where just getting by and my finances control my life stop being automatically true. Here's something worth being honest about. The first $10,000 is usually the hardest $10,000 you'll ever save. There's no compounding helping you yet. Almost all of it came from raw discipline, dollar by dollar, with nothing multiplying in the background. Present bias is the specific reason this feels so hard early on, a well-documented tendency to overvalue immediate rewards over future ones. Saving toward an abstract number with no visible progress yet is exactly the situation present bias fights hardest against. The documented fix isn't more willpower, it's automating the decision so it's made once, in advance, rather than renegotiated every single payday. Even Daniel will tell you, his first $10,000 took longer, relative to the amount, than almost any stretch of saving since. That's not a personal failure. That's just what an unassisted, zero compounding milestone looks like. The next $10,000, whether it's saved or invested, gets real help this first stretch never had. Interest on the existing balance, or market growth if any of it moves into investing, doing part of the work automatically. That doesn't make the next stretch effortless, but it's structurally easier than this one, which is exactly why the first $10,000 deserves more credit than it usually gets. Concretely, $10,000 is usually enough to cover about 2 months of a median household's core living expenses without touching a credit card. That's the actual, specific thing that changes, not a feeling, a real buffer against the 4 or 5 most common financial emergencies. A $500 car repair used to mean a credit card balance carried for months. At $10,000 in savings, it means writing a check and moving on with your week. This matters more than it sounds like, because the average American household credit card balance sits around $6,500, often built exactly one unexpected expense at a time. $10,000 in savings is the thing that interrupts that specific pattern before it starts. The same logic extends to the bigger emergencies, just partially instead of fully. A job loss that takes 2 months to resolve is covered by $10,000 at a median household spending level, without a single missed bill. A larger, unexpected medical bill gets absorbed instead of immediately becoming new debt, even if it doesn't cover the whole thing. It changes what happens next from borrow immediately to pay this down deliberately. There's a specific bias that shows up almost exactly at this milestone: mental accounting. The tendency to treat money differently depending on where it came from, instead of treating all money as equally real. A tax refund is the classic example. People routinely spend it more freely than earned income, calling it free money, even though it's exactly as real as a paycheck. The same trap applies to a savings milestone. Once $10,000 exists as a round number on a screen, it's tempting to mentally reclassify it as a cushion that's fine to dip into for something non-essential, as if crossing the milestone somehow made it less real than the paycheck it came from. The documented fix is simple to state and harder to actually do. Treat this money with exactly the same weight as the income that built it, dollar for dollar, milestone or not. A tax refund spent frivolously and a savings balance spent frivolously are the same mistake wearing two different disguises. The label windfall or milestone doesn't change what the dollar is actually worth. The sunk cost fallacy is continuing something specifically because of what's already been put into it, rather than evaluating it on its future value alone. The classic example is holding on to a bad investment because I've already lost so much, when the money that's already gone has no bearing on whether the investment is still worth holding today. This bias gets more expensive, not less, once there's real money on the line. At $10,000, a bad recurring subscription, an underperforming investment, or a financial product that no longer makes sense has more capacity to quietly drag on the total than it did when there was nothing to protect yet. The size of the balance changes the stakes of the decision, but not the logic of it. Money already committed is still gone either way, whether it's $50 or $5,000. The fix is the same one used for investing decisions generally. Whatever's already spent is gone regardless of what happens next, so the only thing worth evaluating is what a choice does from today forward, not what it would take to feel like the earlier decision was justified. There's a specific risk that shows up right around this milestone that doesn't get talked about enough: social comparison. Once money stops being a source of constant stress, it's easy to start noticing what everyone else seems to have: a nicer car, a bigger apartment, more frequent trips. Social comparison is wired into people. It isn't a character flaw, it's a documented, near universal bias. The practical fix isn't willpower either. Unfollowing aspirational accounts and deliberately shifting focus from visible spending to your own net worth number. The related risk is FOMO spending, overspending on events, experiences, or investments specifically because of social pressure, not because the purchase itself was ever the goal. A simple, useful test. Would you still want this if literally nobody else would ever know about it? One specific, documented guardrail: the 24-hour rule. Any unplanned purchase over $50 gets a full day's wait before it happens. This directly targets impulse buying, a purchase triggered by emotion, marketing, or convenience rather than an actual need. And something online shopping makes measurably worse: a small technical step that reinforces the same rule, removing saved payment information from shopping sites, so an impulse purchase requires actually typing in card details again. Friction that gives the 24-hour rule time to actually work. Worth knowing at this stage specifically: anchoring bias. Where the first number you see disproportionately shapes what feels reasonable afterward, a car dealer showing a $45,000 sticker price makes $38,000 feel like a deal, even though the anchor itself was manufactured. Always research the real market value independently before negotiating anything, especially now that there's real money to protect. One more guardrail worth setting the moment real savings exist: a subscription audit. The average American spends around $219 a month on subscriptions, but only actively uses an estimated $86 of it, and on average, wastes about $32.84 a month on subscriptions that are never used at all. None of that money individually threatens $10,000 in savings, but it's exactly the kind of quiet, recurring leak that's worth closing now that there's something real to protect. A quarterly audit takes minutes and directly funds the next stretch of saving instead of leaking out unnoticed. One guardrail worth taking seriously specifically because real savings now exist: investment scams. Federal Trade Commission data reported more than $7.9 billion in losses to investment scams in 2025 alone, with a median individual loss of more than $10,000, almost exactly this milestone. Having real money to invest is precisely what makes someone a target for guaranteed return pitches that didn't exist as a threat when there was nothing to lose yet. $10,000 is real progress. It is not the finish line. The full 3 to 6 month target for a median household still runs up to $30,600, meaning for most people, $10,000 is roughly a third of the way to fully covered, not fully covered itself. The specific risk at this stage is lifestyle inflation quietly absorbing the momentum, spending rising automatically as a raise or milestone arrives, a bigger apartment or newer car absorbing money that could have kept building this fund. The documented fix, useful well beyond just this milestone, commit to saving 50% of every future raise before adjusting spending upward, so the increase gets split instead of fully absorbed. There's a related reason a spending-driven celebration of this milestone tends to backfire: hedonic adaptation, new purchases feel exciting briefly, then fade back to an ordinary baseline. A $60,000 car typically feels unremarkable again within about 3 months. Research on this specifically points toward experiences, not possessions, as producing longer-lasting satisfaction, which matters here because the milestone itself is worth acknowledging, just not necessarily with a large purchase. The single most useful thing to do the day you cross $10,000 is genuinely nothing. Leave the same automatic system that got you here running exactly as it was, all the way to the real target. Concretely, this week is worth a quick check. Confirm this $10,000 is genuinely earmarked as emergency fund money, not double counted with a different goal from an earlier video in this series. Confirm it's sitting in a high-yield savings account, not a checking account. And confirm the automatic transfer that built it is still running, unchanged, toward the real 3 to 6 month target. And if you're watching this well before $10,000, everything in this video still applies early. The biases don't wait for the milestone to show up, and the guardrails work exactly the same whether the balance is $1,000 or $10,000. The number in the title is a checkpoint to aim at, not a requirement to already be at before any of this is useful. $10,000 won't fully cover a median household's emergency fund target, but it's real. Specific coverage against the most common financial emergencies, it's the hardest stretch of saving you'll do since nothing is compounding yet. And it arrives with a real cluster of risks worth naming: mental accounting treating it as bonus money, the sunk cost fallacy getting more expensive now that there's something to protect, social comparison, and FOMO spending once the stress lifts, lifestyle inflation and hedonic adaptation quietly absorbing the momentum, and a genuinely higher exposure to investment scams now that there's real money to target. The guardrails are specific too. The 24-hour rule, removing saved payment info, knowing anchoring bias when you see it, a quarterly subscription audit, and skepticism toward guaranteed return pitches. The only actual mistake at this point is stopping the system that got you here. This video is for educational purposes only and is not personalized financial advice. Emergency fund targets and expense figures are based on median U.S. household data and will vary significantly based on your own cost of living, dependence, and job stability. The psychological patterns described here, mental accounting, sunk cost, social comparison, anchoring, are well-documented tendencies, not a diagnosis of your own specific behavior. Scam statistics and subscription figures reflect the years they were reported and will shift over time. Verify current figures before citing them elsewhere. Next video, we're looking at what building wealth in 5 years actually, realistically looks like. Subscribe so you don't miss it. New videos every week on the personal finance topics school never covers.